Maya Johnson had always been someone who appreciated the little things in life. At 24 years old, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that drew people to her. She worked hard during the week as a graphic designer, juggling deadlines and client meetings with ease. But on Fridays, she made it a point to slow down and take care of herself. It was her way of recharging after long days filled with stress and endless tasks. On this particular Friday evening, Maya decided to treat herself to dinner at one of her favorite restaurants. The place wasn't fancy or expensive. It was more like a cozy neighborhood spot where everyone knew each other's names. Soft jazz played faintly in the background, blending perfectly with the hum of conversations from nearby tables. Dim lights hung overhead, casting warm glows across wooden floors and mismatched chairs. For Maya, it felt like stepping into a different world, one far removed from the chaos of everyday life. She arrived just before sunset, when the golden light filtered through the windows and painted patterns on the walls. Her usual table by the window was free, so she slid into the chair and let out a small sigh of relief. This was exactly what she needed, a moment to breathe and simply be present. As she opened the menu, she couldn't help but smile at the familiar dishes listed inside. Everything sounded delicious, but she already knew what she wanted: the grilled salmon with lemon butter sauce, paired with a side of roasted vegetables. While waiting for her order, Maya pulled out her phone to scroll through social media. She liked keeping up with friends and family, even if most of them lived miles away. Scrolling past pictures of smiling faces and funny memes, she chuckled softly to herself. Life might have its challenges, but moments like these reminded her of all the good things too. Occasionally she glanced up to watch the world outside the window. People walked by in twos and threes, some laughing, others deep in conversation. Cars passed slowly, their headlights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled over the city. The restaurant itself buzzed with activity. Waiters moved between tables, balancing trays laden with food and drinks. A young couple sat near the entrance, holding hands and whispering sweet nothings to each other. At another table, a group of friends erupted into laughter, clearly enjoying each other's company. Even the bartender seemed cheerful, expertly mixing cocktails while chatting with customers seated at the counter. Everything about the scene felt comforting, almost cinematic in its simplicity. As the minutes ticked by, Maya allowed herself to fully relax. She leaned back in her chair, letting the music wash over her. There was something magical about evenings like this, when time seemed to stretch endlessly, giving her permission to savor every second. She thought about how lucky she was to live in such a vibrant community, surrounded by kind-hearted people who genuinely cared for one another. Sure, there were tough days, but nights like this made everything worthwhile. Her thoughts drifted, briefly to work. Earlier that week, she'd landed a new client, a local bookstore looking to revamp its branding. Designing logos and marketing materials was her passion, and she loved seeing businesses come alive through her creations. Still, it wasn't without its pressures. Deadlines loomed large, and sometimes clients weren't easy to please. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight was hers, and she intended to enjoy every bite of her meal without worrying about emails or revisions. When the waiter finally arrived with her drink, a sparkling water with a slice of lime, Maya thanked him with a warm smile. He nodded politely before disappearing into the kitchen again. Sipping slowly, she turned her attention back to her phone, scrolling absent-mindedly. Outside, the sky grew darker, dotted with stars peeking through the clouds. Streetlights flickered on, illuminating the sidewalk where shadows danced playfully beneath the trees. Everything seemed perfect. The ambiance, the anticipation of her meal, the gentle rhythm of the night, all of it combined to create an atmosphere of calm contentment. Little did Maya know, however, that this peaceful evening was about to take a dramatic turn. Unseen forces were converging, ready to disrupt the harmony she cherished so deeply. Yet for now, she remained blissfully unaware, lost in the serenity of the moment. Had anyone told her what was coming next, she might not have believed them. After all, why would anything bad happen on such a beautiful night? Maya trusted the world around her, or at least She tried to. She believed in kindness, in fairness, in the idea that people should be treated equally regardless of their differences. And so, she continued to sit there, soaking in the warmth of the restaurant, completely unprepared for the storm that was about to break. The evening was still humming along pleasantly when the restaurant's door swung open, letting in a gust of cool air. 2 police officers stepped inside, 1 man and 1 woman. They wore their uniforms with an air of authority, their badges glinting under the soft lights. At first, no one paid them much attention. It wasn't uncommon to see officers stopping by for coffee or a quick meal after a long shift. But as they scanned the room, their presence began to feel different. More deliberate, more intense. Maya barely noticed them at first. She was scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing up to check if her food was on its way. When she finally looked over, it was because she sensed something unusual, a shift in the energy of the room. Conversations had quieted slightly, and several pairs of eyes were now fixed on the newcomers. Still, she didn't think too much of it. After all, what reason did she have to worry? She was just sitting there, minding her own business, waiting for her dinner like everyone else. But then, the male officer turned his head, and his gaze landed directly on her. His expression hardened instantly, as though he'd been searching for someone specific and had finally found his target. Without hesitation, he started walking toward her table, his boots clicking against the wooden floor. The sound seemed to echo unnaturally loud in Maya's ears, each step sending a jolt of unease through her body. Something about the way he moved made her stomach tighten. It wasn't casual or friendly, it was calculated and aggressive. When he reached her table, he stopped abruptly, towering over her. "Is this your car parked outside?" he demanded, his voice sharp and accusatory. There was no politeness in his tone, no attempt to soften the question. He spoke as though he already knew the answer, and as though he'd already judged her, guilty of something. Maya blinked, caught off guard. She hadn't expected anyone to approach her, let alone a police officer. For a moment, she considered whether she might be mistaken. Had she parked illegally? Was there some issue with her vehicle? Quickly running through possibilities in her mind, she realized none of those things could be true. She had double-checked the parking rules earlier and made sure everything was in order before heading into the restaurant. "Yes," she replied, calmly, meeting his gaze. Her voice was steady despite the knot forming in her chest. "It's my car. Is there a problem?" Instead of answering her question, the officer leaned in closer, narrowing his eyes. "People like you always cause trouble," he said, his words laced with disdain. The phrase hit Maya like a punch to the gut. People like you. It wasn't just an insult. It was a label, a stereotype wrapped in contempt. Every fiber of her being wanted to argue back, to demand an explanation for why he was treating her this way, but she held herself together, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice firmer now. "What exactly do you mean by that?" He ignored her question entirely, shifting gears without missing a beat. "Do you know how many complaints we get about cars like yours blocking spaces? Do you even care about following the rules?" Maya stared at him, incredulous. None of this made sense. She hadn't blocked anyone's space, nor had she broken any laws, yet here he was hurling accusations at her as though she were a criminal. What struck her most, however, wasn't just the baselessness of his claims, it was the underlying tone of his words. There was a clear implication behind them, one that went beyond mere suspicion or misunderstanding. This wasn't about her car. This was about her. By now, the entire restaurant had gone silent. Conversations had come to a halt. Forks paused midair, drinks left untouched. Everyone was watching the scene unfold, their expressions ranging from shock to discomfort. Some diners exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do or say. Others openly gawked, unable to look away from the confrontation playing out before them. Even the staff seemed frozen in place, hesitant to intervene. The female officer lingered, near the entrance, observing the interaction but not stepping in. Her posture suggested detachment, as though she'd rather stay out of whatever conflict was brewing. Whether she agreed with her partner's behavior or simply chose not to challenge him remained unclear. Either way, her silence only amplified the tension in the room. Maya felt the weight of all those eyes on her, judging her, scrutinizing her every move. It was humiliating, not just because of the officer's words, but because of the spectacle he was creating. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was being treated like a suspect, a threat, someone unworthy of respect. Each second that passed felt heavier than the last, pressing down on her until it became hard to breathe. Still, she refused to back down. Drawing on every ounce of strength she possessed, she kept her composure intact. "Officer," she said, slowly, enunciating each word carefully, "I assure you I followed all the parking rules. If there's a specific issue with my car, please tell me so I can address it." Her calmness seemed to infuriate him further. Instead of responding reasonably, he raised his voice, spitting out another barrage of insults. "Don't play innocent with me," he snapped. "We both know you don't care about rules. You're probably lying right now." Every syllable stung like a slap across the face. Maya clenched her fists beneath the table, fighting the urge to lash out. She knew better than to engage in an argument with someone who clearly wasn't interested in listening. Rationality had no place in this exchange. It was fueled by prejudice, not logic. And yet the injustice of it all burned inside her, threatening to boil over. As the confrontation dragged on, Maya couldn't help but notice the irony of the situation. Here she was, a law-abiding citizen, trying to enjoy a peaceful evening. And instead she was being attacked by the very people sworn to protect her. The thought filled her with anger, sadness, and a profound sense of betrayal. How could this happen? Why was she being singled out? These questions swirled in her mind, unanswered and unanswerable. Despite the mounting pressure, Maya managed to maintain her dignity. She sat upright, her shoulders squared, her expression resolute. She wouldn't let him break her, not here, not now. Though she couldn't control his actions, she could control how she responded to them. And she chose to respond with grace, even as the world around her crumbled into chaos. Little did she know the worst was yet to come. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Maya sat frozen in her chair, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. The male officer's words hung heavy in the air, each one dripping with hostility and accusation. But what happened next shattered any semblance of calm that remained. Without warning or explanation, the officer reached out and grabbed Maya's arm. His grip was firm, almost painfully so, as though he were trying to assert dominance over her. Maya flinched at the sudden contact, her eyes widening in shock. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay composed. "Let go of me." But he didn't let go. Instead, he yanked her up from her seat, forcing her to stand. The movement was abrupt and violent, sending her phone clattering to the floor. Patrons gasped audibly, some leaning back in their chairs while others covered their mouths in disbelief. It was as if time had slowed down, every second stretching into an eternity as the scene unfolded before them. "Is there a reason I'm being treated like this?" Maya asked again, her tone firmer now, bordering on defiant. She tried to pull her arm away, but his grip only tightened. Her pulse raced, fear mingling with anger as she realized this wasn't going to end quietly. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet here she was being manhandled in front of strangers, humiliated in a place where she had once felt safe. The officer ignored her protests entirely. Instead, he barked another command. "Turn around." When Maya hesitated, confusion and indignation rooting her to the spot, he repeated himself, louder this time. "I said, turn around." His voice boomed through the restaurant, silencing even the faintest whispers. Reluctantly, Maya complied, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what was happening. And then came the handcuffs. The cold metal clicked sharply against her wrists, biting into her skin as they were secured. Tightly behind her back, Maya's breath hitched, tears welling in her eyes despite her best efforts to hold them back. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of nightmare, a cruel twist of fate that would wake her up any moment now. But no matter how hard, she wished for it. Reality refused to budge. She was standing in the middle of a restaurant, surrounded by people who could do nothing but watch. Her freedom stripped away in an instant. "You're under arrest," the officer growled. His tone, devoid of emotion. Arrested for what? Maya wanted to scream the question, but the words caught in her throat. She couldn't form coherent sentences anymore, not when her world was crumbling around her. As the officer began leading her toward the door, she stumbled slightly, her legs feeling weak beneath her. The female officer finally stepped forward, opening the door for them, though her expression remained unreadable. Outside, the cool night air hit Maya like a slap, jolting her back to the present. Bystanders on the sidewalk turned to stare, their faces etched with curiosity and concern. Some pulled out their phones, recording the scene without hesitation. Flashing screens illuminated the darkness as cameras captured every painful moment. Maya kept her head down, unable to meet anyone's gaze. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like an animal trapped in a spotlight. Inside the restaurant, chaos erupted. Diners began murmuring among themselves, their voices rising in outrage. One man stood up, slamming his fist on the table. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "She didn't do anything wrong." Others nodded in agreement, their anger simmering just below the surface. Even the staff looked visibly shaken, exchanging worried glances as they debated whether to intervene. But outside, Maya barely registered the commotion. All she could focus on was the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The officer shoved her roughly into the backseat of the patrol car, ignoring her quiet protests. The interior smelled faintly of leather and disinfectant, a stark contrast to the warm, inviting atmosphere of the restaurant she'd left behind. As the door slammed shut, sealing her inside, Maya finally allowed herself to cry. Tears streamed down her face, hot and relentless, blurring her vision. She leaned forward as much as the handcuffs would allow, resting her forehead against the seat in front of her. How had this happened? Why was she being punished for something she hadn't done? The questions swirled endlessly in her mind, each one more suffocating than the last. Through the window, she could see people gathering around the car, their expressions a mix of sympathy and disbelief. Some tapped on the glass, offering words of encouragement. "You didn't deserve this," one woman called out. "Stay strong." Another man shook his head, muttering something about injustice under his breath. Their support meant everything to Maya. It reminded her that she wasn't alone, even in her darkest hour. But none of it changed the fact that she was sitting in the back of a police car, her hands cuffed behind her back, her dignity trampled into the ground. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She closed her eyes, trying to steady herself, to find some semblance of peace amidst the storm. Yet every time she thought she might regain control, another wave of emotion crashed over her, pulling her under once again. For a brief moment she considered fighting back, demanding answers, refusing to cooperate until someone explained why she was being treated this way, but deep down she knew it wouldn't help. Arguing with someone who saw her as less than human would only make things worse. So instead she sat silently, letting the tears fall unchecked, praying for this nightmare to end. Unbeknownst to her, the tide was about to turn. While Maya wrestled with her emotions, the male officer stood beside the car, speaking urgently into his radio. Dispatch crackled to life, relaying information that would soon change everything. But for now, Maya remained unaware, lost in her pain and humiliation, wondering if she'd ever feel whole again. The night air was heavy with tension as the male officer stood near the open door of the patrol car, his hand resting on the roof. His radio crackled to life, breaking the silence that had settled over the scene. At first, the voice coming through was faint and garbled, but then it grew clearer, urgent, almost panicked. Dispatch relayed new information, their tone sharp and clipped as though they were trying to make up for lost time. "Officer, we've received confirmation," the dispatcher said, her words ringing out loudly enough for Maya to hear from inside the car. "The report about the suspicious vehicle matching the description you provided? It's been flagged as a false alarm. Someone called in a prank tip." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She strained to listen, her ears catching every word despite the haze of fear and confusion clouding her mind. A prank call? That meant none of this. The accusations, the handcuffs, the public humiliation had any basis in reality. It was all a mistake. No, not just a mistake. A fabrication. Someone had intentionally set her up, using her car as a target for some cruel joke. And yet, here she was, sitting in the back of a police car, treated like a criminal. The officer froze, his body going rigid as the gravity of the situation hit him. For a moment he didn't move or speak, his hand still gripping the roof of the car. Then slowly he lowered the radio and turned toward Maya. The look on his face said it all. Guilt, panic, disbelief. He knew exactly what this meant. Not only had he acted too hastily, but he had done so based on unfounded suspicion. Worse yet, his actions had been fueled by bias, something he couldn't deny even if he wanted to. Maya watched him through the window, her tear-streaked face reflecting in the glass. She saw the exact moment realization dawned on him, the way his shoulders sagged, the color draining from his cheeks. He opened the door cautiously, as though afraid of what might happen next. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled. "Miss, I need to take these cuffs off you." His words felt surreal, like they belonged to another world entirely. Maya blinked, unsure whether she'd heard him correctly. Was this really happening? Just moments ago, he had treated her like a threat, barking orders and refusing to listen to her protests. Now he sounded hesitant, almost apologetic. Part of her wanted to lash out, to demand answers for why he had treated her this way. But another part, the stronger, calmer part, knew that reacting impulsively wouldn't help. So she simply nodded, holding her wrists out silently. The officer fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as he unlocked the handcuffs. They fell away from her skin with a metallic clink, leaving red marks where they had dug into her flesh. Maya rubbed her wrist gently, wincing at the tenderness. She avoided looking directly at him, focusing instead on the people gathered outside the car. Some still held their phones, recording the unfolding drama, while others whispered among themselves. All eyes were on her now, watching to see how she would respond. Once the cuffs were removed, the officer stepped back, giving her space. But he didn't leave. Instead, he hovered awkwardly, his expression a mixture of shame and desperation. "I'm so sorry," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "This was all a misunderstanding. I didn't know." He trailed off, unable to finish his sentence. Maybe he realized there was no excuse for what he had done. Or maybe he was too overwhelmed by the weight of his own actions to find the right words. Either way, his apology felt hollow, inadequate. How could a few simple words undo the damage he had caused? Maya wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet, anyway. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Around them, the crowd began to disperse, though many lingered nearby, reluctant to walk away before the story reached its conclusion. The female officer stood a few feet away, shifting uneasily from one foot to the other. She hadn't said much during the entire ordeal, choosing instead to remain silent. Now she looked torn, unsure whether to step in or stay out of it. Finally, Maya found her voice. "Do you have any idea how it feels?" she began, her tone measured but firm. "To be treated like a criminal because of the color of my skin?" Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. She didn't raise her voice or shout, she didn't need to. The raw emotion behind her statement was enough to cut through the tension like a knife. The male officer flinched visibly, as though her words had struck him physically. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. What could he say? Any attempt to justify his behavior would only dig him deeper into a hole of his own making. Instead, he dropped his gaze, staring at the ground as though searching for answers written in the pavement. Maya continued, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion swirling inside her. "You accused me of things I didn't do. You insulted me in front of everyone. You put handcuffs on me without cause. And now you're telling me it was all a mistake? She paused, letting her words sink in. A mistake doesn't begin to cover it. By now, tears were streaming down her face again, but they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of frustration, of anger, of exhaustion. She had spent years navigating a world that often judged her unfairly, that made assumptions about her based on stereotypes rather than facts. Tonight, those assumptions had escalated into something far more dangerous, something that could have had lasting consequences. The officer swallowed hard, clearly struggling to process everything. He glanced briefly at his partner, perhaps hoping for support or guidance, but she offered none. This was his mess to clean up, and he knew it. Taking a deep breath, he tried again. "I truly am sorry," he said, his voice trembling with sincerity, or maybe fear. "I never meant for this to happen. Please, can we start over?" Start over. The phrase echoed in Maya's mind, bouncing around until it lost all meaning. Could they really start over after what had just transpired? Could she trust him to treat her fairly moving forward? These were questions she couldn't answer immediately, but one thing was certain. She deserved more than an empty apology. She deserved accountability. As the seconds ticked by, the officer grew increasingly desperate. He pleaded with her not to file a complaint, explaining that doing so could jeopardize his career. "I've worked so hard to get here," he admitted, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. "One strike against me and I could lose everything." Maya listened carefully, weighing his words against her own feelings. On one hand, she understood the stakes. He had devoted years of his life to becoming a police officer, and losing that identity would be devastating. On the other hand, his profession came with responsibility, and tonight he had failed miserably to uphold it. Could she forgive him? Should she? For now, she chose to remain silent, letting the question hang unanswered between them. Outside, the last remnants of the crowd dispersed, leaving behind only the faint hum of distant traffic and the soft glow of streetlights. The night felt quieter now, though the memory of what had happened would linger long after the chaos faded away. The air between Maya and the officer was thick with tension, a fragile balance of guilt and defiance. The male officer stood there, his face pale and drawn, his hands fidgeting nervously as though he couldn't decide what to do with them. His earlier arrogance had vanished, replaced by raw vulnerability. He looked like a man clinging to the edge of a cliff, desperate not to fall, and in a way he was. His career, his reputation, his sense of self-worth all dangled precariously over an abyss of consequences. Maya, still seated in the back seat of the patrol car, finally found her footing. She wiped her tears away with the sleeve of her sweater, taking slow, deliberate breaths to steady herself. Her emotions were a tangled mess: anger, sadness, disbelief, but she refused to let them consume her. Instead, she channeled that energy into clarity, focusing on the moment at hand. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about accountability, justice, and ensuring that something like this never happened again, to her or anyone else. "I don't want your excuses," Maya said firmly, her voice cutting through the silence like glass breaking. "You can't. Just say, 'I'm sorry,' and expect everything to go back to normal. What you did tonight, it's not okay." The officer flinched visibly at her words, his shoulders sagging further. "I know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I messed up. I acted without thinking, and I let my biases get the better of me. I swear I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Maya studied him closely, searching for sincerity in his expression. Part of her wanted to believe him, to think that maybe he genuinely regretted his actions, but another part of her knew better. Apologies meant nothing if they weren't followed by action. Words alone wouldn't undo the damage he had caused. They wouldn't erase the humiliation she had endured in front of strangers, nor would they heal the emotional scars left behind. "Do you even realize how much power you have?" Maya asked, her tone sharp but controlled. "When you put those handcuffs on me, when you called me out in front of everyone, You used that power recklessly. You treated me like I was less than human because of the color of my skin. Do you understand how dehumanizing that feels? The officer nodded slowly, his eyes downcast. Yes, he murmured. I do. And I hate myself for it. I've always prided myself on being fair, on treating people equally. But tonight, I failed. I failed you and I failed myself. For a brief moment, Maya almost felt pity for him. Almost. She could see the weight of his shame pressing down on him, forcing him to confront the ugliness of his own behavior. But sympathy wasn't enough. It couldn't be enough. Not after what she had been through. You keep saying you're sorry, Maya continued, leaning forward slightly. But sorry isn't going to fix this. If you really mean what you're saying, if you really want to make things right, then prove it. Show me that you're willing to change. The officer hesitated, clearly caught off guard by her demand. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. What do you want me to do? He asked, his voice tinged with desperation. Tell me, and I'll do it. Anything. Maya considered, his offer carefully weighing her options. She knew she had leverage now, a rare opportunity to hold someone accountable for their actions. But she also knew that revenge wouldn't bring her peace. This wasn't about punishing him. It was about creating meaningful change. After a few moments of thought, she made her decision. First, she began, her voice steady and resolute. You need to attend mandatory bias training, not just some quick seminar where you sit in a room for an hour and check a box. Real, intensive training that forces you to confront your prejudices and learn how to overcome them. The officer nodded eagerly, relief flickering across his face. Done, he said quickly. I'll sign up tomorrow. Second, Maya continued, ignoring his eagerness. You need to write me a formal apology letter. Not an email, not a text message. A handwritten letter explaining exactly what happened tonight, why it was wrong, and what steps you're taking to ensure it doesn't happen again. And I want it delivered to me personally. Again, the officer agreed without hesitation. Of course, he said. Whatever you need. And lastly, Maya added, her gaze piercing, your department needs to issue a public statement, acknowledging this incident. People deserve to know what happened here tonight. The truth, not some watered-down version of events. Accountability matters, especially when it comes to law enforcement. This final request gave the officer pause. He glanced nervously at his partner, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, before turning back to Maya. A public statement, he repeated slowly, as though testing the words on his tongue. That might be tricky. There are protocols we have to follow and— No, Maya interrupted, her voice firm. If you're serious about making amends, then this is non-negotiable. Transparency is key. If your department refuses to acknowledge its mistakes, then nothing will ever change. The officer sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, it seemed like he might argue, but then he relented. All right, he said quietly. I'll talk to my superiors. I can't promise anything, but I'll do everything I can to make it happen. Maya leaned back against the seat, crossing her arms over her chest. She didn't trust him completely, not yet, but she could see the sincerity in his eyes. Whether it stemmed from genuine remorse or fear of repercussions, she couldn't say. And honestly, it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was willing to take responsibility for his actions, even if it cost him. As the conversation drew to a close, the female officer finally stepped forward, clearing her throat awkwardly. Miss Johnson, she began, her voice hesitant. On behalf of both of us, I'd like to apologize as well. We shouldn't have let things escalate the way they did. None of this should have happened. Maya turned her gaze toward the woman, studying her carefully. Unlike her partner, the female officer hadn't played an active role in the confrontation. Still, her silence had been complicit, and Maya wasn't about to let that slide. Thank you for apologizing, she said evenly. But standing by, while someone else does harm, is just as bad as doing the harm yourself. Next time, speak up, don't stay quiet. The woman nodded solemnly, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. You're right, she admitted. I should have intervened sooner. I won't make that mistake again. With that, the encounter came to an end. The officers helped Maya out of the patrol car, their movements cautious and respectful. As she stood on the sidewalk surrounded by the remnants of the crowd, she felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, exhaustion, and a lingering sense that the fight was far from over. The night was quiet now, the chaos having dissipated along with the spectators. Streetlights cast soft halos on the pavement, and the cool breeze carried whispers of distant traffic. Maya took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. She had survived the worst part of the ordeal, but she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Holding people accountable required persistence, resilience, and courage, all qualities she intended to embody moving forward. As the officers returned to their vehicle and drove away, Maya turned toward the restaurant. The staff greeted her warmly, offering hugs and kind words of support. Someone retrieved her phone from inside, handing it to her with a sympathetic smile. Another person insisted on covering her meal, refusing to let her pay. These small gestures of kindness reminded her that not everyone was indifferent to injustice, that there were still good people in the world who cared. But as she walked back to her car, keys in hand, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The officer's apology and promises were a start, but true change would require more than individual accountability. It would take systemic reforms, open conversations, and unwavering determination to dismantle the biases and prejudices that had led to this moment. And Maya was ready to play her part no matter how challenging the journey ahead might be.